Welcome to the Maximizing Learning Outcomes webinar. We'll be covering how to access and distribute assessments, best practices for incorporating them into your classroom, and assessment to development teaching techniques. At the end, we'll open up for questions, but feel free to drop any questions into the chat throughout the webinar. Before we begin, let me introduce our presenters today. First, we have Dr. Alan Bird, the president of the Kozai Group. He is a globally recognized expert in global leadership development with extensive experience teaching at prestigious institutions around the world. Next, we have Dr. Chris Courtwright, who is a seasoned consultant and instructor with over 40 years of experience specializing, assessing, and developing intercultural competence, global leadership, and inclusive leadership capacity. And lastly, we have Avian Rubio, who is the dedicated support specialist at the Kozai Group. She ensures that clients can effectively utilize the Kozai Group assessments to enhance classroom curriculum. So now I'm going to hand things over to Alan to get into things, and then I will be in chat with everyone else as well.
This morning, before we dive right into the subject, I just wanted to take a minute and share with you the thinking behind this webinar. We're coming up in North America, I should say in the Northern Hemisphere, on schools starting and people coming back from their summer vacations. And having moved to a new platform this spring, we thought it would be prudent to have an informal gathering where we could talk with our clients about how we use our different assessments and maybe walk them through some of the things they need to know to operate on the new platform if they haven't already hopped on board. We intended this to be a fairly formal and also a somewhat short webinar. Our intent was to spend about the first 15 minutes just touching upon a few points and then really opening up for discussion and to keep that rather informal. If you're in as an attendee, then right now your microphones are muted, but when we get to the Q&A session, I think given our numbers this morning, and they're likely to change, that we'll just go ahead and open the microphone and turn this into a more free-ranging discussion. With that, let's talk about the new platform. Those of you who've been with us for a while know that we've really struggled with platform providers. In the spring, we were happy to finally connect with a platform to support our assessments by a company that is familiar with what we want to accomplish and is working with us to make that available. Hopefully, that's been reflected in your experience with that shift. Our partner is a company called MindGarden. They have quite a few years of experience in providing this kind of support. So Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the new platform, and then we'll hear from Avian shortly thereafter. So Chris.
Thank you, Alan. It's good to see you. Good to see everyone here. See several clients that I know and treasure joining us. So thank you for joining us this morning. The first question to answer is, why would you choose our three tools? So what is it about those three tools? So we've created a document that will be available to you as a download later that we're calling the Kozai overview sheet. In vernacular, I call it the crib sheet. But basically, it gives you an outline. So the Kozai Group has three assessment tools that can support you in your work. And if you were looking to develop global leaders in corporate managers who lead effectively about cross-cultural diversity around the world, the Global Competency Inventory, GCI, is a great instrument for you. If you're looking to evaluate competencies critical for effective interaction with people who are different than oneself, the Intercultural Affective Scale, the IES, is a great tool for you. Finally, if you're interested in looking at measures of competencies associated with effective engagement in inclusion ways, inclusion behaviors, the inclusion competency inventory, our newest tool, the ICI, is a great one for you. There's a breadth of depth in all of our instruments. The GCI has, all of our tools have three primary areas of assessment: self, learning, and learning, relationship, and self. For the GCI and the IES. For the ICI, it's learning, relationship, and bridging are the three areas. The GCI has 16 different competencies. It's a very intricate tool with lots of detail to follow up on and coach with. The IES and the GCI have 6 dimensions, a little bit simpler to work with. The GCI takes most people about 45 minutes to an hour to take. It has 160 items. The IES and the GCI have 60, and the ICI have 60 items and only take about 15 or 20 minutes to complete. And there's a variety of cost structures. The GCI at the corporate rate is $75 and $45 at the academic or nonprofit rate, and their volume discounts. The IES is $30 at the corporate rate and has $14 for government and nonprofit, and $24 for a pre-post assessment, common use in higher ed. And the ICI runs $30 for all categories. So those are the 3 instruments. There's more detail in the handout of how you would use them, but we just thought a quick orientation to what are the 3 assessments that we are carrying look like and why you might choose them. I like to say, as assessment specialists, always start your assessment process with your proposed ending and look at your learning objectives and what is the evidence. How do you know, and more importantly, how do your learners know they know? And these assessments give them benchmarks to look at where they're going. So think of your learning objectives first. What is the end product of your intervention? And then choose the right tool. And I'm happy to meet with you at any time to discuss that. Back to you, Alan.
Okay. At this point, I'm going to ask Avian to walk us through using the new platform. If you've been on the platform already, this may seem like a quick review. If you haven't used the platform, then Avian will show you some of the things you need to do. And then, as Chris noted, we have a document that will be made available to you at the end of this webinar, and will also be available online at our website. So, Avia, I'm going to hand off to you. And
Great, thanks, Alan. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I see some familiar names. So I will show you how to purchase an assessment from our website. So anyways, let's go ahead and discuss first how to purchase an assessment from our website. And then later on, I will show you what the MindGarden account looks like. So first, when you're ready to purchase an assessment, all you have to do is visit our website, kozaigroup.com, and then go to the purchase assessments page right here. Let me just put this down here. Okay. So go to the purchase assessments page here, and then you will be provided with an option if you want to purchase an individual or bulk licenses. Now, if we click on bulk purchase, you will be presented with the available assessments. And if you scroll down a little bit, you will see an option for an aggregate report. Now, we highly recommend for you to add an aggregate report whenever you make a purchase, since it's for free anyways. Once you have decided which assessment you want to purchase, all you have to do is click on the Buy Now button right here. So let's go ahead and test it out. Select if it's for business or education, and then add the quantity that you need, and then click the Add to Cart button. Now, if you want to add an aggregate report, all you have to do is click on the Continue Shopping button right here, go back to the Purchase Assessments page, and then select the appropriate aggregate report. In this case, since we've added the IES assessment, then I will add the IES aggregate report to my cart. And then the quantity of the aggregate report will depend on the campaign that you will set up. That means if you're about to do a pre and post campaign for a class, then you have to add 2 aggregate report to your cart. So let's just adjust that to 2 and then add to cart. And then here you will see it says we have 2 items in our cart. So that's the assessment that we've added earlier, And then the second one is the aggregate report. When you're done, just proceed to checkout. And there's just 5 steps for you to finalize your purchase. So first page would be the summary where you can delete a line item or you can adjust the quantity if needed. Now, once you're done reviewing the quantity, you can proceed to the next step, which is the details. So for the details, I have it ready here. So all you have to do is enter your email address, your name, the address, and then finally your phone number. Once that's done, just proceed to the next step, which is the address. If you need to update your billing address, then you can do so from here by clicking the update button. When you're done, just proceed to the next step, which is the delivery page. From this page, all you have to do is review the terms of service. And when you're done, just tick the box and then proceed to the final step, which is the payment. Now, one important thing to note is if you will purchase with a PO, you will have to send a copy of your PO via email to the MindGarden support team so they can further assist you with your purchase. Otherwise, if you will make a payment via credit card or via PayPal, then you can proceed with the purchase online. So if you scroll down here, you'll see the option for credit card or PayPal payment. So for credit card, you just need to enter your information here. Once that's done, just click the place order button. And then that's it, as simple as that. Now, when you're ready to send out or set up a campaign, all you have to do is log into your MindGarden account. So this is what a MindGarden account looks like. Once you're ready to set up a campaign, just head over to the campaigns page right here. Scroll down to the very bottom. Select which assessment you want to set up a campaign for. So let's say, for example, we want to set up an IES campaign. So select the assessment, click the Add a Campaign button. And then from here, you just need to work your way through each tabs right here. And each tab contains instructions and details. But if you have any questions or if you need further assistance, of course, you're welcome to reach out to our MindGarden support team. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. With that quick introduction to the MindGarden platform and how we're handling things now, how we manage things, I will just add this note. With our work with MindGarden, terminology has changed. What we used to call the group report is now called the aggregate report, and that's to accommodate some of the way they handle things. And I'll just note that the aggregate report is free, but it has to be ordered when you make your purchase. If you decide later that you want the aggregate report, you won't be able to get it at that point. So our general recommendation is that you choose as a default the aggregate report. Now, some of you may be thinking, why isn't that just bundled? And it has to do with the nature of the architecture and the fact that we have many clients who don't use the aggregate report, don't feel the need for it, and for them it's an additional hassle. At this point, let's switch gears. We've talked about the assessments, but I think it'd be useful in just a few minutes to share a few tips about how we use assessments in the classroom. So, Chris, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Okay.
And before I do, I'll simply note that we have on our plans for the fall an intention to do a full webinar on classroom tips and the different ways that our clients have been using this. But for this morning, we thought we would keep it simple and just to a few thoughts. Chris.
Thank you, Alan. And before I get started on that, I want to let you know that we have prepared a few sets of materials for those participating and those who join us later. And we re-upped a document called 6 Steps to Successful Assessment. And that'll be available to you. And it walks you through with screen captures of what the details that Avian just shared with you. So let's talk about teaching and learning and what we've learned over these years. One of the things I love about the mindset and the methodology that the Kozai Group uses is that it starts with what you do have. And then with that as a baseline, you can choose to grow something new or different. And so it really, really focuses on what I like to call an appreciative inquiry approach. Find out where the learner is, value where they're at. Assessment is a place of vulnerability. There's no place for blame and shame when we're doing this, and then encourage them to step forward. And that's an important thing to think about. In the materials that, and there are guidelines in all of our tools to look deeply at yourself as a global leader, being intercultural effective or being inclusion, and to think through what that means for you and where you want to go with it. So think about that carefully as you design your own instructional design. We will include, as one of the many handouts, my favorite exercise that I learned from a brilliant adult educator named Ray Vlodkowski. And it's called Carousel Graffiti. And it's all about when you hand out the results, getting learners to share in small groups where they've learned to do these things, and to go around the room and really discuss those, because you really want to support the learners in recognizing that all of these competencies exist in all of us, and also that they can be grown. And we found that this is a very impactful exercise in getting people to identify with the competencies, to recognize where they're at and what they have done, and then to be willing to share it and to grow it with themselves and others. It's a very impactful practice, and it will be one of the materials that we share with you today. And I'll leave it at that. Alan, you had some ideas.
Okay, yes, one of the things I do that I found effective, and I've used this in working with groups in Europe, in Asia, and in North America, is that I will often, before I introduce the assessment results, I'll have participants go and complete the assessments, and then I will wait to distribute the assessments until we meet in class. And before we do, I like to introduce the different dimensions. And as I introduce the different dimensions, I will ask students to assess, or participants to assess themselves. I'll say on a scale of 1 to 7, where do you think you fall with regard to exploration, which is one of the dimensions in the IES. And so when I'm ready to hand back the feedback reports, participants have already done an assessment of themselves. And when they get, I'll hand back the results and I'll ask them to go ahead and take a look. And of course, everybody immediately wants to see what their scores are. How do they do? Where am I at? But then we'll take some time and we'll look at what their self-assessment, just as they were learning about and being introduced to these concepts, what was their reaction, and how did they see themselves? I found that often there's a fairly close alignment, and where there isn't an alignment, that's an opportunity to talk. Sometimes it's about self-awareness. Sometimes it's about what I would call the measurement issue. What's the yardstick we're using to, and so there's some great conversations you can have within that. And when students talk, often they'll say, well, I assessed myself, but the results I got on the IES or the ICI are different. And we'll have a conversation because both of them reflect in their own ways where that person is at and how they're thinking. And so that's a tremendous foundation. At this point, I want to shift. We've already taken a little bit longer, but I anticipated we might. I want to shift to the third thing that we were going to focus on, and that is how can we ensure and enhance student learning through assessments. And I will say, for me, the key to that is the is the personal or professional development plan. We use the acronym PDP. And depending on the group I'm working with, it's either personal or professional, but it always comes back. And so, Chris, I'm going to hand it back to you to talk about that for a few minutes.
Yes, thank you, Alan. You know, I've been thinking long and hard about this process, and I've started calling it assessment to development process and or practice. And it's the ability to take in information. When we offer an assessment, we're actually taking our learners and putting them up on a couple of steps and acting as a tailor, and there's a set of mirrors all the way around them. And they're looking at themselves with new perspectives. And your job is to help them recognize what's there, evaluate what's there, and then decide deeply what they can commit to growing and changing. And like Alan, I would say that the personal development plan we have found is the most effective practice. It really, really zeroes in on things. But there's ways to get there and ways to think deeply about that. One of the practices I have found very impactful is to ask my learners, I frequently teach in a classroom setting, to identify a study buddy, a partner, and to pair up and to share their personal development plans with each other, and to agree to coach, encourage each other throughout the week, and to report to me weekly in the learning management system what they've done, what they learned from their accountability partner, and what they're going to do differently in the next week. It's a time and depth process. And I found that it really, really makes a huge difference, and encourage you to adopt that. The other thing I want you to think about, and we will share with you a slide that's called the Kozai developmental model, is to think about the depth of engagement across difference that you are ensuring your learners have access to, and what's called the valence, or the quality and the frequency of the feedback loops. The deeper they are engaged across the differences that you are hoping that they will be effective with and grow, and the better quality feedback loops that you have developed into your curriculum will ensure growth. And I will kid you not, I sit down with every one of my interventions, assignments, training, classroom, whichever, and I look at my learning objective and I look at them and say, how deep am I going, and where are the feedback loops? Where are they going to hear from themselves, each other, or me as to what's going and what we could do better? And I really think them through carefully. This is highly, highly in what I call intentional instructional design. You don't just let people go and expect them to grow. They have to know what they're doing, why they're doing it, set smart goals, and to get feedback as to how that process is going. With those elements, you'll get good results.
Thank you. With that, we've covered in fairly quick fashion what we had wanted to share with you this morning. And now we're moving to the part where we're hoping you'll share with us. Going to open the floor for questions. We're interested to hear from you. And Donna's already got her hand up. Donna.
I knew she'd be first. I knew she'd be first.
So thank you so much for doing this. And I did have a good experience with MindGarden in my spring class. For those of you who don't know me, I teach undergraduate courses for computer information technology, where we're trying to help students kind of see where they are in terms of their intercultural effectiveness and how to move that needle forward. And so this is an opinion question. I know that you've been doing this a while, and I wonder if you would like to tell us about any trends that you're seeing in any particular group, and particularly in the undergraduate ages. And I will turn my mic off and listen. Thank you very much.
Chris, do you want to go first, or?
Sure. You know, it's interesting, and thank you for that question. And for those of you who don't know, and I recommend you reach out to Donna and exchange contact points of information. She is a fearless instructor. She puts things out there and has her learners try things that you would never think of, and it's genius. Let me say that what I have noticed with my learners is that and I can't really put my finger on exactly what it is, but between the pandemic and trauma and just a different mindset of learners, that the self-inquiry is I'm finding a little bit less difficult to open up to ask them to look at themselves. It used to be like, oh no, I'm cool. I don't need to know that stuff about them. Now I'm finding they're very open to learning about themselves. But the other thing to consider is that a lot of it has to do with being boxed up and shut off through the pandemic. And so there is a need to engage, but a little uneasiness and a little discomfort in who is that other person and how do I engage them. And so because it's been so mediated by technology, that there is a different level and a different type of shyness than I used to have in the past. And so it's been very interesting. I teach blended classes, so we meet in person as well as online. And I have to be much more intentional about the introductions and the friend building and the friend sharing as a mechanism to initiate what we're about to do together than I used to. And it's not bad work, it's good work, but it's an important, very important foundational aspect that I have found is important.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on what Chris said. What I've really noticed, and I've spent the last several years teaching in India and in Japan, but I see it, and I actually hear it from some of our colleagues. The social skills are rusty or somewhat underdeveloped. I'll say, going back into the classroom, and it takes I perceive a little more work now. That the longer term implications for that, I think, have to do with living in a digital world and living in what I'll call a digitally moderated world, where people are accustomed to much shorter communication. And I see this reflected in several ways. In all of my courses have a developmental component. Now that's been a radical shift since I've been working with, and it may sound odd, but since I have been working with the Kozai materials and really changing my approach to teaching. I don't consider myself a teacher as a development coach now. Even in a classroom of 50 or 60 students, I view my work as not providing them with content, but with providing them with developmental experiences, and then helping them navigate those experiences. And I find myself working a little bit harder in some respects. Now, the other part of that, I'll say, is that I have found in students more recently, and I've worked with graduate students. Most of my courses in Japan involved a heavy mix of students from around the world, not just Japanese students. I've seen a much greater willingness to engage in the developmental process, to recognize its value, and the upshot of that is, after in my courses, they will work on it for 10 to 15 weeks, whatever their development plan is. I found myself spending more time helping them think about the next cycle or the next iteration of that plan, in ways that I wasn't doing 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm excited about that, because it suggests that the current, I hate to say generation, the current version of students seems to be more open to that development than in the past. But Curtis has got a question for us in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And the question, in case you don't have chat open, is Curtis is asking, for global leaders, what are the top 2 areas you see impacting how they develop business and social skills, and are you seeing new skills emerge? This is a great question, and I just finished working on several chapters for the 4th edition of the Global Leadership Handbook that co-authored with a number of colleagues. Well, let me take the first part of that, the top 2 areas. I think unquestionably the for me, the most important one is curiosity. I am struck at how often effective global leaders are asking questions, which is a demonstration of curiosity, and Hal Gregerson at the MIT Leadership Institute has really made this his focus for, I would say, about the last 5 or 6 years, and he's indeed written a book about asking questions. And some other notable academics have also drawn attention to this. And underlying that, of course, is a curiosity, but that willingness to constantly ask questions, to probe, to drill down more deeply. The work that Gary Adu and Joyce Osland and I have done around that suggests that that is a real hallmark. The second area, I think, which is critically important, is I'll label it more broadly mindfulness. I don't want to go technical and too far in that direction of global leadership, but the mindfulness which is reflected in how we approach communication, our openness to others and the like. Within the GCI, there are several dimensions that I think capture aspects of mindfulness. That awareness of the context you're in, of the people you're interacting with, of reading them, of understanding them, and then the ability to adjust accordingly. I think those two right now are ones that I would pay a great deal of attention to. In terms of new skills, I think they have, to go back to something I said earlier, I think they go back to living in a digital world. How global leaders have to be able to use digital technologies effectively, particularly in a global context where so much of your leadership and so much of your activity is at a distance. So how do you influence people at a distance? It's always easy, I should say, always easier. It's usually easier when they're at close quarters, when you can reach out and talk to them in person, connect with them, interact with them. But when you've got to reach halfway around the world in a different time zone, you know, under different conditions. So let's go back to the mindfulness and aware of those things and how they may affect the way we're interacting. So I would say chief among those would be the digital, I'll call them digital skills. I don't really have a good name for them at this point, but it reflects the digital world that has become part of our environment in this day.
So I'll just make a general comment about what, this is Donna again, for those of you who don't know me. I work mostly with computer science and computer information technology students. And so they get into the classroom and they're looking for the keyboard. And I'm like, it's not that kind of class. And what really captures their imagination is when their current state of intercultural effectiveness is assigned a number. They just love that number. And they have extreme passion to work to improve that number. And it becomes a very important thing. So at least for this segment of the population, just numerically assessing something gives them a way to prove to themselves this has value, and they're very excited about it. And I get emails later on after they graduate. So they really enjoy that experience. So I just love the numbers.
You know, Donna, it's interesting. One of the power of assessments is in giving students a vocabulary, and say students, in your case, giving them a vocabulary for how to talk about certain things that they may have encountered or will encounter. And the other part of that is giving them a sense of where they stand. Now, sometimes I'll have students say, well, you know, how do you know this is where I'm at? And I'd say, you know, and I'd say, well, you gave me, and I gave you an interview, and based on how you answered the questions in that interview, you know, this is what I came up with. And they say, well, when did I do the interview? I said, well, when you answered the questions in the assessment, that gave me some insights. And so that opens a door for them to think about, how did I answer the questions? You know, what was I thinking about? And we don't go in item by item. I don't think that's worthwhile. But I do get them to self-reflect more. And of course, there's an interesting phenomenon that happens when people self-reflect, and that is they often recalibrate. They change the metric. Now, I don't want to say the metric. The metric's the same. They change the measurement. And changing that measurement. We often see this. In fact, if you work extensively with the IES, and to some extent we see this with the GCI, issues around self-identity, about how they see themselves. They recalibrate to a higher plane. They hold themselves to a higher standard in what constitutes, I'll say, what constitutes effective behavior, what constitutes appropriate behavior. This is something related. I have a doctoral student I'm working with in India right now who's working on the ICI, the Inclusion Competencies Inventory. And she put her finger on what was happening with some of the graduate students, and that was what's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. People who are relatively uneducated or unknowledgeable about a particular subject often perceive themselves to be more knowledgeable, to be more informed. And then as they learn more, they realize how little they know or how much more there is to it. And realize, well, gee, I'm not where I thought I was. And we see that a lot with these instruments. The students will think of themselves. I go back to my exercise. Some students will rate themselves as quite highly, and their scores will come, you know, in that little informal assessment. And then they'll get their scores, and they'll say, my scores are lower. You know, they love the scores, but they, you know, the scores irritate them. And then we'll talk about, well, you know, and what would someone who's high in this particular competency look like? What would someone who's low in that look like? And we actually Kozai, those are available online. I'm trying to think where they're available online, Chris. But that's useful in helping students kind of get their bearings and put some meat on the numbers, if you will.
They're embedded in the reports now, and they're very instructive. And one of the things that a colleague who was present when I very first learned these tools, a very highly trained executive coach, used to say, the assessment is a catalyst for a conversation. And the first conversation is within themselves. What does it mean to me? Who am I? How does this reflect me? Back to the metaphor of the tailor and all the mirrors. And then from there, they can grow. But it's that catalyst for the conversation. And they can be very, very impactful.
So with that, thank you all. And we wish you the best. We hope to be in touch with you again soon.